You know, folks, this is our day to talk about the courts. I told you what I think about Emmett Sullivan, which I've told you many times. We're also going to turn today and talk with another individual. This is a gentleman who is running for another court in Texas. This is actually an appellate court that relates to criminal appeals. His name is Kevin Yeary, and he is running. Actually, Kevin Patrick Yeary, he sounds Irish. But anyway, he is running for re-election to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which is, and I think Matt the Wonderful is going to get him on the phone. He got him, okay? Which in Texas, and he will explain this to you, but this is the highest court for criminal appeals in Texas. And he's up for re-election also. And if you have him, I'd love to have you bring him on. Hello, sir.
Hello, Debbie. How are you?
I'm very well. It's nice to see you. That's great. In case I forget your name, I can just look behind you on the screen. I love it. Okay. So we just been talking. I actually have Bill Whitehill in the studio. We've been talking a little bit about the upcoming election, November 3rd. I would love to have you just tell our listeners what exactly the Texas Criminal Court of Appeals does, because you're up for re-election this fall, November 3rd. What do they do? What is the kind of cases you look at all day long?
Sure. It's a terribly important court. It's the Supreme Court of our state for all criminal cases. And so that means it's the court of last resort in Texas for anything criminal. Beyond our court, the only place to get any kind of relief is the United States Supreme Court. The Texas Supreme Court hasn't decided criminal cases since about around 1876. And so there was a court created back then called the Court of Appeals that started hearing all the criminal cases. In 1891, that court's name was changed to the Court of Criminal Appeals. So we've been a part of the state now for going on nearly 130 years. We're one of only two states with two Supreme Courts. The other state is Oklahoma, and I believe they followed along behind us. Texas was the trailblazer in this whole concept of having two Supreme Courts. The Court of Criminal Appeals does important work in Texas. We really do three major kinds of things. The first of those kinds of things is that we review the decisions that are made in criminal cases by the intermediate level courts of appeals. And so that would be like the Court of Appeals that Judge Whitehill serves on. He serves on the Fifth Court of Appeals. Each of those intermediate courts of appeals are identified not only by the city in which they sit, but also by the number of the court that designates them. So they're in Dallas. You have the Fifth Court of Appeals. Over in Corpus Christi, they've got the 13th Court of Appeals. In Houston, they've got the 1st and the 14th. So that's our first major category of work, is we review those decisions that are being made by the intermediate courts of appeals and make sure that there's a consistency to those decisions that are being made all across the state. The second major kind of work that we do is we hear the direct appeal from the trial court of any case involving a death sentence in Texas. Those cases are the only ones that do this, but they skip over the intermediate courts of appeals and they come directly to us. And so our court is the court that makes those decisions about whether or not the trial court judgment is an appropriate one in a death penalty case. And then finally, we're the only court with the power in Texas to overturn a final felony conviction. And what I mean by final is a conviction where an appeal has happened and the defendant lost, or where the time for filing an appeal is over and the person did not appeal at all. And so those are final felony convictions. The only way that people can overturn those is if they file what's called an application for the writ of habeas corpus. Mm-hmm. Those convictions then are reviewed by our court, and we make a determination about whether some relief ought to be granted, even though it hasn't been obtained all the way up to that point.
Okay, I'm going to ask you the same question that I began with Justice Whitehill today, which is this. Some people who don't pay that much attention to the legal system or to politics might see two names on a ballot. They haven't heard of either of them. You know, someone's running for a particular seat in the appellate court. In your case, in Texas, the highest criminal court of appeals, the criminal court of appeals. And they can say, well, what difference does it make? The laws are the laws, the facts are the facts. I mean, do you see in the criminal realm the kind of analogy that people often refer to in your court, or I mean, generally speaking, with respect to judges, where you have activist judges kind of not wanting to apply the law, leniency, or whatever word you use, kind of not wanting to follow the law. Is that a problem at the level of the court you are, that you can get judges need to be committed to following the law versus driven by some other mission?
Yes, I think it is something for us to be terribly concerned about as Americans. I certainly have a judicial philosophy. I heard Judge Whitehill speak about his. Mine boils down to, or at least the starting point of my judicial philosophy is that one of the things that makes this country and this state really great is that we have a separation of powers. I don't have the power as a judge to dictate how the law ought to be executed. And I don't have the power as a judge to say that, well, I'm just going to create a new rule that everybody has to follow. That's not my role in this system. The role of judges is to decide a case between two parties, who wins the case based upon the statutes that were written by someone else and that already exist, and based upon the Constitution, which again was written by someone else and approved by the people and already exists. I should not sort of be an adventurous judge and try to solve all the problems of the world. That's the kind of judge you get out of me and out of most of the Republican judges that I've met that serve on our appellate courts. But yes, there are different judicial philosophies, and some judges do believe that it is their role in the system to sort of fix things and solve problems. And when you get that type of an attitude about the job of a judge, it is very easy to find yourself in a place where you begin to write opinions that dictate how people are to execute the law in the future and dictate what the rules of the game are from today going forward. Whenever we do that as judges, we leave our role as a judicial officer and take on the mantle of either an executive, which is really something that is in the power of the governor in our state, or take on the power of the legislature. And that is not why people send us to the courts. They send us there to decide the cases and keep the system moving along.
I love that point. And it's an interesting thing in the criminal side. I think there are many cases you tend to read in media, cases where people become sympathetic toward a particular accused person, either broadly speaking because they think there's a general, our laws are too harsh, or our system is unfair, or even in a particular case, knowing some outlying facts that shaped the events that happened, the reason the person was prosecuted. Whatever the reasons are, people get sympathetic. And I can imagine a temptation, especially as an appellate court judge, to say, yeah, I understand the conviction happened, and it seems like, the law was followed. I don't see any error in the jury instructions. I don't see a failure to provide counsel. This just seems so wrong. And I can understand that temptation. And I can understand people thinking, I want a judge to do that. I want them to kind of substitute their judgment and right some wrong. But the problem is the famous slippery slope. Once you decide, well, we're going to do something different, where does it end? And sometimes it's going to end maybe where people don't want it to end. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I absolutely do. And I think we forget too often that the executive, be it the governor or the president, who's been exercising his executive power to be the relief valve for our criminal justice system, there is the power of a pardon and the power of a commutation, and the power that those powers exist in the executive branch. That's what our Constitution provides for. So if we see ourselves as sort of the people who are supposed to provide that relief valve for when something in the system, the procedural circumstances that have gone on in a case has gone wrong, well, we're really stepping out of our role when we do that. The role of the governor is to either grant a pardon or grant a commutation of a sentence. And so, we don't do that just because we want to. In fact, it's been one of my personal sort of important considerations in every case is that I don't think that I would be a good judge if I liked every decision I make. In fact, daily, I find myself sometimes making decisions that it's not what I would prefer. But the people have elected legislators to go to Austin to write the law, and they should expect that those laws that are written by the people that they elected to do that are going to be followed. And I feel like it's the job of a judge to make sure that that's going to happen. And many times it may not be the law that I would have preferred, but that's what the legislature chooses to do, and it's their job to do that, not mine.
Well, I love that reminder about the power of the governor or the highest executive official, the governor or the president, to offer relief in a case where a lot of people looking at it would say, that doesn't seem right, given all the facts we all know as a culture, as a society. I love there's another step forward, but the idea of staying in the, kind of catchy phrase right now, staying in your own lane, staying in your lane as a judge and doing the job of the judge, it makes the system fair for everyone, and it makes it so that the judges who are, if you begin that process, I can see so easily how that whole slippery slope thing happens, and pretty soon you're getting in the role of a legislator. And one example I give about this, then I want to come back to you and just have you tell people how to find you. I remember that decision, and it was one of the ones that Justice Scalia on the Supreme Court made, where he basically said it was a flag burning case, and he was making the point, and he spoke about it too. I hate when people burn the flag. It is so wrong. It's so disrespectful. But the fact is, they do it as an expression of free speech. The purpose of burning it is to make a statement. And so he can despise the conduct, but uphold the free speech rights of the person who does that. And it's funny, I've had other shows where I get people complaining afterwards because I think it was one of the most, it's a clear example, people understand it, and it was one of the most eloquent defenses of the notion of the rule of law matters. The role is not to insert his or her personal opinion, but to follow the law, and in that case in particular, to protect the rights of free speech, even doing something you deplore. So, Justice Yeary, tell us how people can find you and support you and know more about your campaign for re-election.
Absolutely. I have a campaign website. It's judgeyeary.com. If you type it into your URL line on your web browser, you can find me very easily, judgeyeary.com. I also have a Facebook page, a Twitter account that goes by the name Judge Yeary, @JudgeYeary, as well as an Instagram page. I don't really use those, the Twitter or the Instagram accounts very often because I'm not a really techie person. I do play around on Facebook a little bit just to let people know where I'm going and what I'm doing. And sometimes I post new things that have happened on my website. In fact, if people were to go there today, they would be able to see that a day or two ago, I posted about some travels that I had been making around the state and spoke a little bit more in depth about my own personal judicial philosophy about how to do the job of a judge the right way. And so I encourage people to go there and read that and reach out to me. There's a contact icon on that page. If you have questions for me, certainly ask them. I'm not afraid of any question. I won't answer every one of them because sometimes one of the things that judges shouldn't do is decide a case before the case comes before them. And so I that's one of my sort of scruples. I'm not going to tell you how I would decide a particular case that might come before us in the future. But I'm happy to discuss lots of other things like judicial philosophy, the history of the court. These are all things that I have an intense interest in and really enjoy sharing with my fellow citizens.
Judge Yeary, thank you so very much for joining me today at America Can We Talk. I so appreciated that. And again, friends, if you didn't see the large letters behind him, I'll tell you it's Judge Yeary, Yeary, and it's judgeyeary.com. And again, go all the way down the ballot on November 3rd to the top race to the bottom, or start at the bottom if that's easier. But these decisions we make about who sits in our courts, who are our judges, they impact your life in ways you don't even contemplate the day you're in on election day. So I wanted to make sure and feature these fine judges in the great state of Texas, and I'm sure you have many more where you are.